10 o'clock time, 10:07, and as well 10 p.m. here in China. Scott, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump right into a few things. We heard Nikki Haley just at the end there mentioned Taiwan right at the end. She just kind of squeezed that in there, and that she had nothing but good intentions, but saying that if we back down or back away, there's going to be more war. Any thoughts on neocon Nikki's outlook?
Well, since the United States and China began normalized, I should say since the Chinese Communist Party in the United States began normalized diplomatic relations back in the early 1970s, the idea of one China has been out there. I mean, we have a one China policy, but it's never been real. It's always been fake. The United States has been playing word games with China in hopes that we could, over the course of time, cause the termination of the Chinese Communist Party's iron grip rule on China. We were hoping that market capitalism would engender the rise of a middle class that would not allow themselves to be ruled by an autocratic communist party dictatorship, things of that nature. So we played the word game of a one China policy, but what we really wanted was a one Taiwan policy, meaning that we wanted the collapse of communist China and a return of the Kuomintang or whatever ruling party it was from Taiwan back into China, so that it's one quote unquote democratic China. That's been our objective. And of course, history shows that the Communist Party has not gone away, that it has actually mastered the art of market capitalism in a way that doesn't require the end of political communism. The Chinese have not only created a middle class, but a huge middle class that's thriving. And the United States now is left with a one China policy that's been exposed as meaningless, because we really always wanted a China that looked like Taiwan. So we're not willing to give up Taiwan. And that's the problem. Our policy says one China, but the reality is if we can't have all of China being Taiwan, then we want two Chinas, Taiwan and China. And that's the trajectory that American policy is on right now. China has, during this entire time, spoken about the absolute requirement for the peaceful reunification of Taiwan and China. That only under certain extreme measures would China undertake the use of military force. And again, one is if Taiwan declares its independence straight out, and another one would be if the United States started to create a formal military alliance type structure, in which case China would be compelled to take action, but that their priority has always been the peaceful reunification. Except now, China for the third straight year has passed a huge defense budget. I think the numbers, between 220. I think the official number is one thing. What people believe the real numbers are is another. But the bottom line is it's in the vicinity of $270 billion. And in talking about this and the policies behind this enlargement, for the first time, the Chinese premier has not used peaceful reunification when he speaks of China's policy towards Taiwan. So we're headed towards a war with Taiwan. I mean, it's still one that China hopes can be avoided. There it is. And hopes it can be avoided. China would prefer peaceful reunification, but it is being realistic. This is why you have the third straight year of massive defense spending where, now I will say this, that the Chinese have described their defense spending. One of the reasons behind it is to deter Taiwan from taking any precipitous action. So it means that war is not the inevitable outcome of this defense spending. But at the same time that China is worried about, Taiwan declaring independence, et cetera, we have the United States starting to rethink decades-long approaches towards Taiwan, including towards China, including China as a nuclear power. China has rightfully begun to worry about America taking its nuclear posture, which gives a green light to nuclear preemption and non-nuclear arenas, and in fear that America, if it ever came to a war, a war over Taiwan, that the United States might launch a preemptive strike to eliminate China's nuclear deterrence and therefore leave China vulnerable to American nuclear domination. And that would cause China to have to back down on Taiwan. So while China is being forceful about insisting that there be peaceful reunification, and forceful and making it known that if Taiwan or the United States chooses a different route, China will be ready to act upon the violent reunification. China will also is looking at restructuring, expanding its strategic nuclear deterrence, and it has to do this in order to create a capability that can survive an American first strike and still have sufficient nuclear counterstrike capability to bring serious harm to the United States, thereby deterring the United States from this action. So even though the budget is about Taiwan, it's about everything, because the United States is challenging China everywhere. We're challenging them in the South China Sea. We're challenging China, on a global scale, and China has to be prepared for this. And the United States has also shown itself willing to use proxies. India has just deployed 10,000 troops to the Chinese border in a very precipitous, provocative manner. India is doing this at the behest of the United States to create instability on China's frontiers, so that China is distracted, that Chinese resources are diverted, along multiple fronts, thereby weakening China everywhere. China, in passing its third consecutive massive defense spending, is saying, no, we'll be prepared for all matters, that we're not going to allow the United States to seize the strategic initiative from a policy standpoint by weakening us here, there, and everywhere, and therefore leaving Taiwan as this ripe fruit ready to be plucked. And so this is what's happening. So, Nikki Haley is, she's sort of right. There's going to be a war with Taiwan, but it's not because China wants this war. It's because the United States wants this war, because the United States has only one policy option, which is military. We don't have the ability to compel China to change its policy course through economic coercion, sanctions, etc. We don't have the diplomatic clout around the world to isolate China diplomatically. All we have is the threat of military power. But the reality is this military power is non-existent. We're setting ourselves up for failure. And China's defense budget just guarantees the ultimate outcome, that the United States will, of course, lose any war with China over Taiwan.
It's interesting that, we're talking about the military budget this week and why it's hitting the headlines. China just wrapped up its 2 sessions here, and just to give the audience an idea what that is basically, the entire Communist Party is getting together in Beijing over, anywhere from 7 to 10 days to go into details where these budgets are going to be spent, how they're going to be spent, what city gets them, what military budget. There's not, squabbling around saying, oh, let's pass it maybe next month, or emergency, or last minute. These boys and girls, they get there, they hammer down, they pass these things. There's lots of new, possibly new bills that are brought in, and they approve it and they get on with it. But let's talk about that number. I mean, we hear a huge American numbers every year, but then again, the Americans military are constantly in action. So it would be like, for example, Scott, if somebody said, okay, I got $1 billion a year, or a trillion, almost, $100 billion or $200 billion, and I'm going to have to spend half of that. Here comes China. They're spending a lot of money. They haven't really been in conflict for 40 years. Is that just stockpiling? Are they more ready to go than the Americans think?
I think, let's point out a couple of things. Chinese Communist Party rule is not the equivalent of, the American democracy. American democracy was designed for inefficiencies. I mean, from the very start, if you read the Federalist Papers, they speak of, the populist emotions of the House of Representatives and the need to contain that by creating a Senate that one of their main functions is to slow the process down through deliberations. And then we have the separation of powers between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, which again provides checks and balances towards a precipitous rush towards policy judgment. That's supposed to buy time to make sure that everything's done dispassionately, and it's done in accordance with constitutional guidelines. So our government's actually one of the most inefficient governments in the world when it comes to doing things in a timely fashion. The Chinese Communist Party is not inefficient when it comes to doing things. So right off the bat, understand that our system is a system that has built-in friction, and to overcome that friction, you need resources. So we have to spend more to get less. China, when they're spending, they're getting more from spending less, meaning that their purchasing power is much greater in China. They get bigger bang for their dollar than we do. So it's not. You really can't talk about the amounts of money being spent. You have to talk about the processes involved. You just talked about a 2-day process. Probably more than that, because I'm sure there's a lot of conferencing going on beforehand. But the Chinese very efficiently sat down and said, okay, this is the budget. This is how it's going to be spent. Boom, 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 no debate. Then it goes out. The money's received. That money gets dispersed. It gets spent in accordance. China's not perfect. We know that. We see the corruption trials. We know people are getting arrested for corruption. We know that money corrupts people, whether you're a communist or a Democrat or whatever. It's there. So we know that China isn't a perfect system, but it has far less distractions in terms of bureaucratic processes and human tendencies than we do in the United States. We can't even pass a $64 billion budget allocation to Ukraine that everybody in the United States is screaming, this has to happen. Europe's, this has to happen. We can't do it because there's disagreement, fundamental disagreement within the United States Congress. Even when we pass it, it doesn't get, distributed in a comprehensive, logical fashion. It goes into the defense industry, contract procurements. More money's eaten away through the inefficiencies and corruption of that process. People, it's going this, there, and the other thing because the way Congress has dealt it. We have factories in different states. Nothing's streamlined. Different arrangements for how we allocate money, spend money, different accounting procedures. I mean, we just have huge inefficiencies built into the system that just sucks the money right out of it. So we spend a lot of money and we don't get much, in comparison. Everybody's going, oh my God, almost $1 trillion a year. We're not getting $1 trillion worth of benefit out of it. China spends $270 billion a year. They're getting about $1 trillion of efficiency out of that money. So what China's doing right now is it's getting a military that matches its national security requirements. During the period of time when the United States respected the the one China policy, I'm sorry, China didn't have to really worry about going to war over Taiwan. The peaceful reunification meant just that. So they had some military capability, but they weren't actively preparing to invade and occupy Taiwan. They didn't feel there was a need to do that. They didn't feel there was a need to expand their strategic nuclear forces because the United States wasn't talking about, retargeting communist China. The United States was working with China economically as to try and cooperate. Through cooperation, then domination. But as a result, China's defense budget didn't need to be as big as it needs to be today. Today, China is looking around. They realize because a large amount of this money's going into what they call remuneration. They're going to have to start paying people better because China's going to have to start professionalizing its military. It's a large conscript military. You can only accomplish so much. If you're going to have a military capable of invading and occupying Taiwan and defeating a professional American military in the process, you're going to need a professional military. You're going to need to be able to master the tactics, the operations, the strategy. You master the technology with the same people. You can't just keep rotating conscripts in and out. You need a professional class of warrior, which means that you now need a career track, not just for the officers, but for the warrant officers, for the enlisted. You need people who are going to say, I want to make this my career. But the goal isn't to be a general when you come out. The goal is to be senior master sergeant or something like that. Professionalism isn't just for the corporate executives. Professionalism is for the auto mechanics as well. And so China needs to have a professional soldier class. That requires more money. It changes the way you train. So China's revamping its entire military slowly. It's not happening overnight, but it's happening at a rapid pace because they recognize that come 2025, 2026, 2027, they may need to be ready to go right now. Right now, China could go, but it would cost them because you're going to war with a military that isn't as efficient in terms of the operations you want it to carry out will be. So you make up for the lack of, of professional proficiency with mass. So you throw a lot of resources at a problem and overwhelm the defenses. And China can win Taiwan, but going to pay a heavy price. So I think what China's doing right now is saying, we don't want to, build monuments to 50,000 men who stormed the beach. We'd rather build monuments to 500 men who used, tactics and strategies properly because they're professional, and we win the war that way. So I think you're just looking at the total revamping of the Chinese way of war. They also are looking at what's happening in Ukraine. They understand, how modern war is going to be fought better than we do. I think they're incorporating technologies, and again, in doing so, they recognize the need for a professional military class. The Russian military that's winning the war in Ukraine is not a conscript military. The conscripts aren't there. The conscripts are out doing other things. The people who are winning this fight are contract soldiers, professional soldiers, men who have signed up for a period of time, and have made this their life. They're for the moment. They are professional warriors. And China's looking at the efficiency of operations that the Russians have and saying, we want more of that, and we don't want conscript deaths. They're looking at Ukraine, which is the equivalent of a conscript army because they're taking untrained people, giving them a very minimal training, and then straight into the front lines. And then they're getting slaughtered in big numbers. That's the fate of the Chinese army if they don't professionalize, because war is hell, and it's a complicated hell.
Now, Scott, how are they going to get to that level? Like, they've put the budget in, and I think, as you're saying, they're going to allocate that to, upping the quality of the soldiers and the commanders and all those people in there. I'm going to ask you a loaded question here. I wanted to ask you this on the last show, but I'm going to ask you it on this one. If, for some weird reason, we could play a game of replacing governments, what would happen? What would happen if we took the American government model here and replaced it in China? What would happen to this country?
What would happen to China?
Yeah.
Well, China's a nation of 1.4 billion people. I would say that within 2 years, you'd have famine, and you'd have probably 1 billion people at risk from starvation. You would see efficient operations become inefficient overnight. You would see what would happen is China has this vibrant economy that we would try to turn into an economy that can interface well with markets like Wall Street, speculation, because in America, that's how you make your money. We don't make money building great things. We make money because people in Wall Street have learned how to communicate sale orders over communications that shave off milliseconds so that they over time accrue an advantage that translates into billions of dollars. What I just told you is how many people make money. They don't make money off of building a better product or anything. They make money off of transactions, sales of pieces of paper that are literally meaningless. If China would have to transition into that kind of economy, which means that all the real stuff that China is doing, and again, people need to understand, when you have a nation of 1.4 billion people, it is a full-time job to make sure those people have employment, have healthcare, have food, have all the requirements of life. It's a full-time job. And if you hiccup, if you screw it up, just one hiccup, hundreds of millions of people pay the price instantly. It's that kind of margin that's operating on. So everybody's criticizing the Chinese Communist Party, and I'm saying, well, what other system could manage 1.4 billion people as efficiently as the Chinese Communist Party? And the answer is none. Now, do I want to live under the Chinese Communist Party? Not as an American, not in the United States. No, I don't. But if I lived in China, understanding that without this kind of control, this kind of managed existence, that everything goes away, people are going to be starving in the streets, famine, disease, outbreaks, I'd say, yeah, maybe I do want to live under that, because the quality of life isn't bad. And here's the other thing. I mean, I remember Jon Stewart mocking Tucker Carlson about something Tucker Carlson did in a shopping center, and Tucker Carlson about high food prices. That's the price of freedom. What a moronic thing to say.
Wow.
Price of freedom. It was as dumb as Jon Stewart's ever been. And I used to be a huge fan of Jon Stewart. But, we in America, we keep talking about freedom, 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 freedom. But what is the price of freedom? Are you truly free if you have to work 3 jobs to make your bills? Is that freedom? What kind of freedom is it? You have to get up at 5 in the morning. You don't go to bed until 11 at night. You're exhausted, but you're free. You don't have enough money to do anything, so you go deeper in debt, but you're free to go deeper in debt. Don't worry about it. When the banks, shut down everything and you kicked out in the streets, don't worry. You're homeless, but you're free. The price of freedom is, in America, is bankruptcy. The price of freedom is homelessness. The price of freedom is starvation, lack of education, lack of health care. That's the price of freedom. In China, they give up certain things, like the ability to become to create friction for government. See, the Chinese can't afford the kind of friction that freedom of speech brings with it. They can't afford to have people who claim a right to speak out, which we claim here in America, and it's an important right. But understand, most of the time when we speak out, we're not making things better. We're just being heard. We're not changing anything. We're just being heard, because it's a freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, but it doesn't result in meaningful change. Very rarely does it result in meaningful change. But in doing so, we do create frictions. We do create inefficiencies, but we're willing to pay that price for freedom. In China, they can't afford to pay that price, because if you start throwing sand into the well-oiled machine, it starts jamming up. And when it jams up with 1.4 billion people, you have huge problems. In America, we're willing to write off millions of lives. Come on, guys. Look at San Francisco. Look at LA. Look at New York City. Look at any big city. Look at Albany, New York, and the homeless that are out there. I just, again, drove back this morning. There they are. Horrible weather right now. Wind chill factors are down below. If you're outside, you're going to die of exposure. We're willing to do that in America. Let this happen. Throw them off, because that's the price of freedom. In China, when you have a problem, in America, the problems that create thousands of homeless in Albany would create hundreds of millions of disenfranchised people in China. Scope and scale, scope and scale. China's operating on a scope and scale that we in America can't even begin to comprehend. And so I think that if China became an American-style democracy overnight, it would be the end of China. It would be absolute ruination.
Scott, I'm reading some of the comments, and I think people need to really dig deep in what Scott is saying. We have this in the West. We use this word freedom all the time, and we say it to people in China, and we actually brainwash people in this country, funny enough, through our propaganda. That's right, propaganda in Canada, especially in the United States, of course. They are the marvels, some of the greatest propagandists on the planet. Just look at some of the media productions done in North America. They have convinced many things that, yes, you are free. What Scott is really saying, and, as you're saying it, I'm sitting here in China and understanding clearly what you're saying, that, yeah, okay, that word freedom in the United States, what does that really mean? Well, does it mean you have the freedom to take a New York subway at 11:30 at night and possibly get killed? Yeah. Does it have the freedom that you might be gunned down in a shopping center? Yeah, that's okay. You can have that too. But what Scott is saying, that when you're managing 1.5 billion people, 1.5 billion people, you have to have at least some sensibility about what you're doing here, because the slightest move or the slightest, let's say, massive increase, if if China went through what a lot of these countries have gone through with inflation over the last 2 or 3 years, it would be big trouble here. And I had a gentleman, he asked me the other day, he said to me, Alex, what in the hell is going on here? And he was an Australian guy, young guy, 24 years old, Jack Tor, good YouTube channel, check him out. He said this to me actually on Saturday. He said, what on earth is going on here? I haven't seen a pothole in the street. Everything's clean. The trees are fine. The parks are good. I'm letting my guard down. I feel totally safe. I feel comfortable walking with my girlfriend anywhere. Yes, there's lots of American shopping malls everywhere you want, Starbucks, you name it. But he says, who's paying for all this? Is it manipulation of the currency? I said, what brought you to that conclusion? He says, well, I read it in the media that they manipulate the currency. I said, to who? For why? I said, you want to really know who the biggest manipulator is? Well, I'll tell you on another time. But what a lot of people miss and don't understand about China is the natural resources of this country, whether it is water, forest, mountains, grasslands, unreclaimed lands, you name it, the government manages it and controls it and owns it. So imagine you don't have to deal with, massive price fluctuations for a sheet of plywood for your house if you're renovating, or you're not going to see these massive spikes in energy bills. Well, that is how you pull it off in a nation of 1.5 billion people. Stability. Scott's not saying that it's mind control and controlling people. It's stability of responsibility of waking up and having that responsibility. These CPC members of over 100 million who have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews, they're all intertwined, and they all understand that if we get it wrong, all of us are going to suffer for it. And Scott, your analysis of that, I mean, can't wait to get you to China. And what you're saying is spot on. You got it. You understand what's going on here.
Well, I try. I mean, look, I'm looking at some of your comments again. My wife tells me, don't read the comments. Don't read the comments. But I'm curious. But many of them are saying, Scott, you've never been to China. You're 100% correct. I haven't been to China. Therefore, Scott, you don't know what really is going on in China. I agree. I mean, I have academic understanding. I talk to people like Alex. I trust Alex's insights, but at the end of the day, I'm not a Chinese expert, and I don't want to pretend to be one. I mean, I know about defense budgets. I know about militaries and transition, and I can speak to that. But at the end of the day, I'm saying things about China that I believe to be true, but I can't say I know to be true because I've never been to China.
But Scott, I think you're spot on, man. Like, I mean, how the way you are explaining it, you can't really explain it any differently with you and I talking about it, because how you've explained it to the person. If I went on here and I just said, you know what, China doesn't have a problem with roads. China can build, these railways. I'm going to get a guy like Jack on Saturday, 4:00 in the afternoon, looking puzzled to me saying, how the hell does this happen here? And I can't just say to him, oh yeah, they just do it. And he's looking for answers. And the way you explain it is you have to explain it to people in the context of, you might not have been here, but what you're saying to me is it's resonating. I totally understand what you're saying. And you have said it rightly and not gone on a tangent saying, US is wrong, China is right. You've said, guys, country, once again, 1.5 billion people. If you tweak it the wrong way, this is not 20 million or 30 million where you raise the tax 4 or 5%. There is responsibility from the top down. And yes, if you are a corrupt person here in China, you're going to pay for it. You're not going to get away with it like maybe some business guys, big fancy fat lawyers, big books, all this kind of stuff. No, you're going to prison. You break the law here, you go to jail. And that's why he's, when you use that word cracking down on corruption, people think, wow, crack down. Oh, it's the iron fists. They're coming down on people. No. It's the responsibility of the Communist Party, the CPC, that attends these meetings, like the 2 sessions last week. that are making massive decisions for this country. And I'm being serious about this. When we're talking about military budgets, when Scott is analyzing and saying, this is a group of people, they are getting it done. Of course, they've met before these big meetings, but they're putting the ink on the paper. They're making decisions for the safety and the security of 1.5 billion people. Yeah. Try to get your mind around 1.5 billion people.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
But here's the other thing about it. When you have 1.5 billion people, you don't have the luxury to do things like we do in the United States. Again, I'll just draw off without getting too specific. A couple of decades ago, here in the Albany area, they were going to extend a road. It's called Route 85. And it was just going to connect downtown Albany with the town of Bethlehem. And so they had the route going through, and they drew it on a piece of paper. And I have a friend whose father was a dentist, and he got together with a bunch of other dentists, and they looked at that line on the map and they said, let's buy up this farmland here, and we'll have it. So when they have to develop this land, because the way the highway is being built, that was logical development, we can sell it and make profit. There's nothing wrong with that. That's, it's business. It's business. I'm sure people in China, I don't know how you buy land in China, but I'm sure people look at the same thing. When a rail line goes out, somebody says, this is where we're going to have to build that upgrade to the city, and that property becomes more valuable. So they did that. They spent a lot of money to buy that. But then the city, the county, everybody ran out of money. And so the highway diverted back, and this property was left there, and it didn't go the way it wanted. That happened in the 1980s. That property has been sitting there now for almost 50 years, undeveloped. And it's got caught up into politics. It used to be productive farmland, but it went fallow. It could be a park, but nobody's allowed on it. It's a historical site. Mellon Farms, they had a historical building that could have been renovated. I could have turned it into a museum. I could have brought people into a wildlife park. Couldn't do that. The citizens voted against big box development. And so now what's happening is the land's being chopped up very inefficiently, and and they're ruining it. They're ruining any great potential this land had, because that's the American way of doing business. We can afford to do that. We can afford to take hundreds of acres and make them absolutely worthless because of politics, because of this, that, and the other thing. Now in China, they can't afford to do that. You got a piece of land out there like that, it has got to be put to some sort of productive work. Either preserve it for the people, make it a park, or turn it into farmland, or turn it into developed land for residential work or industry. But you don't let that piece of land sit for 50 years doing nothing at all. And that's the difference in the approach. In America, we were, the way our nation was created is we didn't have federal control. It was all about the individuals. I mean, Daniel Boone, Boonesboro, the movement west wasn't because the federal government said move west. Yes, we took Lewis and Clark, and Jefferson sent them out there to discovery, but the actual development is done by individuals. The railroads were built by private corporations funded by banks. Yes, the U.S. government wanted it to happen, gave them right-of-way privileges and things of that nature, but the whole American way is about the individual making things happen, corporations making things happen, etc. We could do that because we started small with a huge country where mistakes didn't cost us everything. China's development as a nation is of a large nation that has gone through famine on scales that we won't understand because of government inefficiencies, etc. The Chinese understand that their survival in America, our survival was on the strength of the individual. We always believed in individualism. In China, their survival is dependent upon the strength of the government, on the ability of the government to bring stability, to prevent the famines, to prevent the wars. It's a completely different approach psychologically and developmentally. And I don't think Americans understand it because we've never come in to the notion of saying, well, the government has to control it. Although today, if you think about it, in America, the government controls everything. I mean, the government really does. So we sort of swapped places with China. Because I think China's moving in a direction, even though there's government control, if you think about it, there's a lot more room for entrepreneurship. People can express, there's movement within the system for individuality that never existed before. So it's ironic somewhat that in the Chinese Communist Party, you actually have great opportunities for individualism. Whereas in the United States, we are literally strangling the individual in the interests of big government. So we've reversed roles in our historical development.
Fantastic analysis of this, Scott, and I'm really enjoying this conversation tonight. This is a great comment that just came on the screen. With 1.5 billion, you have no room for social experiments.
None.
That's an interesting comment. Another one is when you use or people hear this word communist or communism, immediately there's this massive fear that comes up. I'm going to tell you guys here, this government, is very well respected here. Now, people say, well, that's a load of BS, Alex. What are you talking about? Not true. Harvard study, not Chinese study. Harvard study did an analysis on it, and over 90% of the people here support what their government is doing. I know that's going to be hard for the average viewer to understand what that really means, but I'm going to tell you, as a Canadian that's come into this country, lived here now on the soil in China, every day I wake up in China, okay? It is managed impeccable compared to what I came from in Canada. Now, here's a little bit of dose of reality for you. 25-year-old friend comes into town here, first time to city of Chongqing. Like I said, met him on Saturday. He says, what on earth is going on here? I was told this, it ain't right. I was told this, that's not right. I was told this, they're wrong about that too. And I keep getting messages, people saying, are you safe? What's going on? He goes, what's going on? And he says, they had me terrified, amped up. I got to the country. People were worried. Oh, go if you have to, kind of this sort of ordeal. That's called a person that's been radicalized. Sorry, guys. Hate to say it to you, but if you're going to tell me what life is like in China and you are not living in China, and I'm talking about the petty, the small stuff. We're not talking about what Scott and I are talking about today here, where, managing 1.5 billion people, no room for social experiments. We're talking about things that, people nag and go on and on about. Oh, well, you can't surf the internet. Yes, I can. I can pull up BBC right now. I've just pulled up a CNN headline. What are you guys talking about? Oh, but you can't go on YouTube. You can't go on Facebook. Chinese people don't want to go on Facebook and YouTube. They don't want to. But
they don't need to. They have their own Facebook.
Exactly. And another reason why is if you put a server, and I'm going to keep this comment on the screen here for about 10 minutes. Imagine the servers from Facebook sitting here in China, and somebody says something really stupid or puts a post that is wrong and says something is happening in the city, blah, blah, blah. And that video goes viral. And there is no stop button on the territory of this country that they could stop that message or whatever it is, fake news, not fake news, or whatever. You got 1.5 billion people in a panic. You have no room. Once again, you have no room for social experiments here. There is a responsibility.
Let's pursue that just for a second and explain why that is. In America, we don't have state-controlled media. Again, the way the United States developed, our information comes from us. Yes, we watch NBC, ABC early on. I grew up with Walter Cronkite as the trusted source of information, etc. But the bottom line is we always had sort of a skepticism built in. The media says so. I don't know about that. It's one of my favorite commercials. I don't know about that. But, we always question that because we could afford to. Because as you said, 1.5 billion people, there's no room for social experiments. In America, it's just one giant damn social experiment, one after the other. And some succeed, some fail, but the consequences of failure, while bad for those, it does not resonate across the whole country. In China, and this is, when you have that many people and you have to have the state managing, information control is paramount because you don't have room for mistakes. You don't have room for hiccups. When words matter and when people say something, words are supposed to generate ideas and responses. And so when you have a nation, a society that is programmed to receive information that is designed to trigger thought processes and responses, you can't have something like Facebook suddenly come in without any preparation and have some idiot, Scott Ritter, come out, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. Because now when an audience looks on, first of all, if they're conditioned to believe that Facebook is an authoritative source, they're looking to it, they open it up, they're going to believe what they read. They're going to say, oh my God, this is happening. Now they're going to be conditioned. They're going to think something, action has to be taken, and it just goes out of control. This is why when, America, we talk about freedom of speech, but look at the struggles we're having today. I mean, you have the government now basically, we believe in free speech. Therefore, we must fight misinformation. But what is misinformation? It's anything the government doesn't control. That automatically becomes misinformation. You see, we don't believe in free speech in America because we've come to the point now where this freedom of speech creates too many inequities, makes the system too inefficient. And so America's starting to struggle with that. And we're doing it by cracking down on what? Free speech. This is why they want the government to come in and control the social media. X is, could you imagine having Twitter in China? I mean, where people are just throwing
Scott,
on a swivel.
Scott, you've been to China. The way you're explaining this right now, I think you've been here somewhere, whether it's subconsciously or whatever. I think you've been to this country because the way you're talking about the information control, not censorship. Scott's not talking censorship. He's saying there needs to be a type of control. I honestly, I'm in a media office right now. Okay. There's 60 employees here. If something comes out in the Chinese news that is not correct and it's a lie, heads are going to roll. Okay. They're going to roll. Now, that doesn't mean the average person doesn't have a voice here. God almighty, man, go down and have a hot pot here on Friday night here. It's a local delicacy. And you're going to hear the average Chinese person beak and complain. They got a hotline number that you can call and complain to the government here. Just because that we use that word freedom of speech, all the time, freedom of speech, we got to read. No, you have the freedom to be an asshole in your country. That's true. Yeah. But do you really technically have the freedom of speech? Sorry, that argument was lost when you took the president of the United States off of all social media.
But the other thing is freedom of speech does not equate into quality of speech either.
True. Very true.
In 2005, I went to Iran. It was right after Ahmadinejad was elected president. And of course, in America, Ahmadinejad, horrible theocrat, and the Iranian people, they don't know what's going on. They're ignorant. They're this, that, and the other thing. And I got to Tehran and I started first of all, I got to Tehran. And once you get through that was back when we were fingerprinting Iranians. So I think I was the first American that showed up in Tehran after that. So they were like, we're going to have to fingerprint you. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, we really don't know how this is going to happen. And we really aren't happy with the process, but come with us. And for a while there, I felt like I was in a police state because I was surrounded by a bunch of, Revolutionary Guard types who were all scowling at me because they really didn't want to be doing what they were doing. And they weren't familiar. Which piece of paper, how does the government want this done? And so it was sort of an unpleasant experience. But then when they released me, cleaned my fingers, and I walked out, it was a free society. I mean, there's taxi cab guys. I hail a cab. Was it controlled by the Iranian intelligence? I don't know. But they take me to the hotel where I check in with the same level of efficiency/inefficiency as you get a do you have a reservation? I can't find your reservation. Found your reservation. Okay. Check in, welcome in, very welcoming. And then I just roamed the streets of Tehran without any restraints. And this is a long way to get to. I was meeting Iranian people in an uncontrolled environment. First of all, thank God many of them spoke English because I don't speak Farsi, but they knew more about America than I did. I mean, they and I'm talking about current events. And I'm like, how do you know this? I mean, I went to one place, started talking, and he said, I offer you my deepest condolences. I said, for what? What do you know that I don't know? Well, for the floods in Houston, we saw that there were people have lost their homes and people were killed. And it just breaks our heart. We offer you our deepest condolences. And I'm like, I had no clue something was going on in Houston. Well, it was headline news. Headline news, which means that the ignorant Iranian people who have no freedom of speech, no access to anything, actually do have freedom of speech. They do have access to everything. As you were talking about in China, in Iran, I sat in on the most wild debates about Ahmadinejad. I mean, and you had guys sitting there, boom, boom, and Revolutionary Guard guys were there having it out. And I'm going, wait a minute, this is like healthy. This is healthy discussion. This is amazing. This isn't controlled a bunch of scared people. These are informed people who know all the facts, and they're throwing it out there, and they're having a discussion. It got a little heated sometimes, but it never got violent. But the whole idea was to have a fair exchange of ideas, and it's happening in Tehran under Ahmadinejad. And so when you sit there and say that in China, I haven't been to China, but I would imagine it's the same thing. That if I walk down to a cafe and I can communicate with the people, because there's a huge language barrier. I don't speak Chinese. I don't speak Cantonese. I don't speak Mandarin. I don't speak anything. And so, but I'm sure some speak English and people translate. If I sat down there and it's
we somebody got it, didn't they?
It's the Great Lebowski, baby. But
go on. Sorry, Scott.
No, but the point is, I'm sure I wouldn't be disappointed in knowing and conversing with these people and realizing that they are extraordinarily well read on the United States, on current events. They can put it in perspective. They're not ignorant about us like we are. I mean, again, if I go have I can't have a conversation about communist China in America today because it begins this way. They're communists. End of discussion. It's just over right there. I can't talk about anything else. They're communists. Do you even know what that means? They're commies. And that's it. That's the level of discourse that you can have about there. And even when they try to elevate it, I mean, you see CNN brings on this guy Cha or something like that. I don't know. He's he hates China, even though he's Chinese. But his whole thing, it always comes down to they're communists. Okay, thank you. That's about the 50 billionth time you've told me that. But what does that have to do with anything? And the answer is nothing. But that's the level of discourse you have here in the United States about China. They're communists. They're Chinese communists. And then the story. In America, do you think, I mean, the equivalent would be if I stood in and I start talking, I go, you're an American. You're a dirty capitalist. But it's a little bit more complicated. I don't want to hear about it. You're an American, a dirty capitalist. But I mean, how do you think Chinese people have to feel when they come to America? Let's talk about China. You're communist. Well, yes, but no buts. You're communist. Come on, guys. That's not intelligent, intellectually based discussion. And that's where we are right now. We have to get through it. So yeah, I do want to go to China. I do want to meet people. I do want to see it firsthand. But I also know that if I take the time to, and this is something that John F. Kennedy challenged America to do in 1963 at his great speech at American University when he was talking about the Soviet Union. He said, we can be in opposition, but he said it's imperative that we understand where they're coming from, what their perspective is, and so we need to get in their shoes and examine the problem from their perspective, from their reality, so we can understand why they're doing what they're doing. So I haven't been to China, but what I have tried to do, and I've tried to do it everywhere I go, is to transport myself in their shoes and then just try to imagine life from their perspective. It's going to be imperfect because I'm an American, but I try and I say, well, if I'm looking at it from this perspective, things that wouldn't make sense otherwise start to make sense. You start to, once you say, I want to see what a Chinese pattern of life is, boom, and you overlay that in your imagination, you go, I understand. Oh, it's like the light bulb's going off. Now, some of that could be wrong because I could be doing it wrong, but at least my brain is trying to get through simply, they're communists, and get beyond that into, what's a little bit more complicated than that.
Scott, you got to give yourself more credit about China. I'm serious. What you're saying is spot on. I mean, please give yourself more credit. The way that you've explained it, I can't even explain it that way. And, people might condemn saying, oh, that word, the way you're describing it. No, it is a reality. I mean, yes, this is a country that has the Communist Party. It's not a bad word here, everyone. It might be in other countries, but it doesn't mean that somebody's working at a boot factory making left boots, and that somebody's working at a boot factory making right side boots, and they're 100 miles away because they're stopping corruption and stolen boots. I mean, no, it's nothing crazy like that. But it is a country that doesn't have room for social experiments. Another thing is when I had this young guy that was visiting the city. He's a YouTuber. He's here on one of our YouTuber programs. He walks into the city and he's walking around and he says, okay, well, why does China censor the internet? I said, well, what do you feel is censored? Well, can't really go on Google. I said, do you think the average Chinese person thinks that, it's censored? Well, they can't go on Google. And I said, who do you think are one of the largest travelers on the globe? It's Chinese. Do you think, and this is for, I see some comments coming towards me now, Scott, okay? These guys saying, well, you're not allowed to talk about this, and you're not allowed to talk about that, and you can't say this, and I know, Alex, you're sitting there in China, and you got to be careful. And, the Chinese people, they don't know any better. Well, I'm going to tell you, last week I was in Thailand visiting some family back there, and I got to tell you, I was on a plane load. I was the only foreigner from Chongqing going to Bangkok. I was the only foreigner on the airplane. I'm going to tell you guys this. Full plane full of Chinese. They did not run to get off the plane to connect and open up and say, okay, for the first time, I get to see what the world is like on Google. I'm not restricted. Oh, this is going to be amazing. They don't care. Okay? They just don't care. You have to put your mind into that. Anyway, let's switch gears, Scott. And that was an awesome conversation about China. How much time have I got left on your schedule? You always got a busy Monday.
Unfortunately, not much. I need to disappear close to the top of the hour.
Okay, let's. This is one of the last things I'm going to bring up then for the show. This is Russians and the Ukraine conflict that is going on. I've been reading a lot of really pro-female soldiers in the Ukraine. As many as 60,000 have been working and signed up. 5,000 on the front line. That's the latest figure. And we're hearing crazy propaganda stories that the day after the invasion from Russia, they signed up. And I don't know. Let's try to make some sense of this. And also, my last comment on the Visit Ukraine website, there are now instructions because they claim there's such an increased demand for signing up and coming to support the International Legion for Ukraine for foreigners that they've improved a few of their requirements. They've made the age from 16 to 60. So I don't know if they're covering their tracks for mercenaries that are already in the country, but let's look at the 60,000 females. Why so many? Why 5,000 on the front line? And how did they get promoted so fast?
Well, first of all, I can't sit here and say those numbers are accurate. I'm not doubting the numbers. I'm just saying that, if I talk about these numbers, I don't want anybody to say, well, Scott Ritter said X, Y, and Z.
Sure, no problem.
But, when the war started, Ukraine had close to 900,000 men and women in uniform, not all on active duty. We're talking about territorial reservists. We're talking about, National Guard. We're talking about border guards, and we're talking about the active duty force, which was around 270,000 at the time. That's a lot of people. So if you have 900,000, 10% female would be 90,000. That's Marine math. And et cetera. So, it's not a unrealistic number of people. Now they're saying that they joined, when after the invasion. I'm sure many women did join. I don't think they're in frontline combat positions per se. A lot of the women, what they call frontline combat position, a lot of the women are medics. So their job is to do combat medicine. Initially, they were in the initial forward receiving place. They weren't the ones going down and evacuating bodies, evacuating wounded. But as the war dragged on and more men died, the women had to push forward and do jobs. So you see now women are not only going into the front to evacuate, but many women are attached to the units as combat medics. So they're on the front lines. And I would imagine that a significant number of qualified Ukrainian women volunteered for this position. Why not? They're allowed to be patriotic. I don't have to agree with their cause, but
Mhm.
you know, if they believe in their country and they want to fight for their country, that's the way they can. But these aren't machine gunners, mortar operators, tank operators. These are medics. The other thing that's happened is an explosion in drone warfare. Many women are very good at electronics.